They might get that one. All right, let's bring Jennifer Westacott in. Thanks very much for your company. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks very much.
Can I just ask you off the bat, do you think that Michael Kroger owes you one hell of an apology? I mean, the whole argument that you're not doing enough to push for company tax cuts, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the centrepiece of the government's re-election strategy.
Well, I'm not going to comment on people's personal attacks, but you know, what I've tried to do and what my job is to try and argue for good policy for the country, to lift our standard of living through growing the size of our economy and obviously creating good jobs for people. And I believe, and I think most leading economists believe, and many people in the business community, practically all the business community believes the best way of doing that is to improve the investment environment by lowering the company tax. And I'm proud that the government has taken this on in their budget, and I'm proud that they've made it a centrepiece of their budget, and I'm proud that they found a kind of 10-year way of staging it in so it's realistic and doable.
Well, let me ask about that, because they have staged it in over a long period of time. What has the response been from your members? What has the response been from business? Because this is not exactly what you called for in your budget submission.
Well, we called for a staging of the tax cut, and we would have liked it to have been staged over a 5-year period and an initial kind of everyone to 28.5%. But, you know, within 7 years we'll have everyone at 27.5, and within 10 we'll have everyone at 25. Look, the feedback I've had from companies is extremely positive, because particularly large-scale investments, you know, they've got long lead times, so people actually aren't sort of getting a return on them and getting product from them for sort of quite some time, and that's when the tax rate really cuts in. So, you know, a lot of companies have said to me, this is going to change some of the things that were not viable before. They're going to be viable now. Companies are looking at, you know, their NPVs and saying, actually, some of these things now look pretty good. Obviously, it's important that it's not a wish list, that the government does stick to its promise of legislating it, and obviously we'll be working hard that as the fiscal circumstances improve, that there's a capacity to bring it forward.
Well, just as a follow-up on that, Jennifer Westacott, on the weekend I wrote about that it would have been, in a purist economic sense, better for big business to get the cut first rather than small business, because the data tells us that that's the real stimulant for economic growth. A Liberal responded to me over the weekend about that and put it to me that, which you're sort of alluding to, part of the purpose behind them, as long as they legislate it, doing it the way that they have, is that there's a bigger turnaround time for investment by big business rather than small business. So as long as it is legislated, there won't be as much of the effect that I was talking about. You'd concur with that, even though you'd rather, obviously, it happen sooner?
I would, because obviously we'd like to happen sooner. But look, what does it do for a small business? It frees up cash flow. And you've seen some of the examples that the Australian particularly has been running about the sort of cash flow it'll free up for smaller business. For bigger business, it changes the equation for these long-run investments. But what I'd like to see is the government legislating it, but doing what they did in Britain, where it did have a very positive effect on business confidence and business investment, is giving room that if circumstances improve, it can be brought forward. Or if our competitiveness declines and continues to decline dramatically, it can be brought forward and accelerated. And that's what the British did, and that was a very, very sensible bit of policy.
The way this election campaign is unfolding, at least in you know, week one, we seem to almost have this debate that says you can have a company tax cut or you can have extra spending on education, but you can't have both. Now, in some ways, I think this is an odd framing. Perhaps it's a false dichotomy. I'm interested in your view on that, because you could equally say you can have 12 submarines in Adelaide, or you can have extra spending on education, but you can't have both. Are you comfortable with the way this debate is unfolding? And what does business think about the various think about being pitted up against more money for schools?
Yeah, look, I'm very uncomfortable with where this debate's heading, because it's really, as you say, a false dichotomy. It's really quite misleading. So, of course, we need investment in education, but there's a few things to say about that. The first is we have to have jobs for people to do. We have to have an economy which is creating the jobs of the future, to use that jargon. We have to have the economy that is managing this transition so that people have got jobs, because we can't have a situation where we've got the most educated unemployed people in the world, or where people feel they've got to go and work in Singapore or in Hong Kong because there aren't the kind of quality jobs here. So that's the first thing. The second thing we have to say is, well, how are we going to pay for that? And we know that a company tax cut improves the growth in the economy, a 1% bigger economy. Now, 1% increase in GDP is $4 billion of extra revenue for governments. And the third point, Christina, is we've got to make sure we're spending that money wisely, because we have spent more on education. The Commonwealth has spent 40% more, but in really crucial areas like mathematics, like literacy, we're going backwards. So, you know, we should not be presenting the Australian people with this false dichotomy, this false choice. It's a false choice. It's a wrong choice. We need a good education system, but we have to have a more competitive economy so that people can get ahead, and that's about giving business a go. I mean, we employ 88% of the workforce. 10 million people are employed in business, and if the business community is chasing its competitors, I mean, our competitors must be rubbing their hands together thinking that the alternate government is going to delay making our economy more competitive. I mean, we need our businesses to be competitive.
Can I just come back to one point you made about jobs, because you talked about the growth in jobs and the need to grow jobs, but in this budget we see nominal GDP forecast to grow at 5% a year, real GDP forecast to go to 3%. That seems somewhat heroic, but unemployment only projected to drop from where it's at now, 5.7% to 5.5, and then kind of flatline across the forward estimates. Is that really enough of a jobs and growth projection to meet the requirements of business, and also to really is it really delivering jobs and growth?
Well, let's take the 3% figure first. So it is doable. I mean, we've just come through a cycle where we achieve 3%, but we need the right settings, and obviously we would say, as would all leading economists, that, you know, the tax rate being competitive and increasing our competitiveness overall is part of that. So we need to get the settings right. Obviously, we should be aiming as a country to achieve the growth rates that have given us the living standards we've got today and the unemployment rate we've got today, which is 3.5%. Now, we need to be pulling out all stops to do that. On unemployment, you know, are we doing enough? Well, first of all, we've got to create the environment for jobs to be created, which is creating the environment for investment to occur, for productivity to increase, for companies to expand. But the second thing we've got to do is we've got to really tackle the entrenched unemployment amongst some groups. And that's why we and ACOS were very supportive of the government's Youth Pathways program, because for once we saw a bit of evidence-based public policy where something that isn't working as well as it should, the work for the dole, let's do something different. Let's try and find a better pathway for young people to get into work. So there's a lot of things to do with unemployment. Some of it's about, of course, the health of the economy overall, but some of it's about the very entrenched disadvantage that we see amongst some people in the community. We've got to kind of grow the economy by giving business a kind of leg up to get ahead in the global economy. But we've also got to, I think, tackle the fact that many people are very disadvantaged as work seekers.
Jennifer Westacott, just going back to something that you said earlier about, in answer to Christina's question about, you know, not liking, if you like, the either-or choices and the way that things are sometimes framed. Would you extend that, as I would, to this business of having a deficit levy rather than just calling it for what it is? It's an increase in the top marginal tax rate, or having a Medicare levy rather than calling it what it is. You know, it's an element to the income tax structure. And we're probably going to see this with the NDIS going forward. There's this sort of theory that you're carving money out that's specifically for roads based on fuel rebates. I mean, to me, it is all just ridiculous.
I couldn't agree more, Peter. I think this is a nonsense, this stuff. I mean, let's go to the deficit levy. First of all, you know, it's a temporary levy. If you're going to make it permanent, well, then you have to say we are going to increase the top marginal tax rate. And then, frankly, you have to make the case for why that's a good thing. And so, you know, people talk about we want the innovation economy, we want the transition economy. Well, you know, you actually have to have a place where, you know, people want to work and they feel that they're rewarded for working here. So this kind of carving out lots of things is really kind of quite problematic. But also, the problem with these deficit levies is they just paper over the fact that people have still got to do the hard work on getting spending under control. So it's sort of like a kind of, we'll put that off for another day, we'll keep spending money, we'll you know, put a deficit levy on, and we don't have to actually solve the problem, that we have got to get spending under control. And then to your point, you know, I don't understand why governments want to give themselves less and less flexibility so that they can respond to the things they need to respond to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
I don't understand it. I think
hypothecation in budgets is something government should definitely resist. I would agree with you there.
Absolutely.
But I want to we only have a couple minutes left. I'd like to just get your thoughts on the NDIS. You wrote an opinion piece a few weeks ago, which really garnered a lot of criticism. I stood up at the time and said, you've raised some really important questions. Again, the budget seems to have vindicated some of your concerns. There is still a $2.1 billion gap in the NDIS in year 4 and no identified way to pay for it going forward.
Absolutely, and I suspect that's not the end of the story, because we still don't have a national scheme, so we haven't brought the state and the federal schemes together. We still haven't sorted out all these boundary issues between NDIS, mental health, aged care, which you know better than most people in the country. So, you know, my view is this is an unfinished business, and it stems from doing the politics before we've done the policy right. You know, we didn't do the pilots, we didn't finish them, we didn't do all they're running now concurrently, I understand that. But this goes to this issue the Business Council's been talking about for a long time. We've got to get these big programs designed better so that they're durable over time, because we are talking about a very disadvantaged group of people here whose expectations are being raised, and you don't want a situation where we're either chasing an unsustainable budget or we're denying people services. So that's why we say put a cap on the spending, which is both going to have, you know, the effect of kind of understanding what our limits are, but also avoiding it falling below the cap, and then start sorting out a national scheme and some of these big boundary issues. But we've got to get the design of this right before we're starting to actually sort of take services away from people, which I think, given the vulnerability of those people, would be a very, very bad place to be.
Jennifer Westacott from the Business Council of Australia. We are out of time. We appreciate you joining us on To The Point. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take a quick break, Christina. A bit I want to talk about around that deficit levy issue. You know, this is one of the criticisms internally of the Liberal Party about Tony Abbott's decision to bring it in. You know, the whole problem with bringing it in is that Labor were always going to keep it, even if there needs to be more legislation. We'll talk about that as well as other issues when we come back.